Hi, everybody. I'm actually really excited to be here because I love talking about science, and you just heard I'm a climate scientist. I want to start off with the good news. We're actually going to have time for 2 questions after this presentation. So if anything sounds weird, fishy, or just not clear to you, just note that down because I will have time to go into that later on. Now, you already heard about the problems we are facing right now due to climate change. But what I want to talk about next is what future are we headed into? And that's actually a quite difficult question, because the one thing that we do know is that our future is not just going to be some smooth continuation of where we are today, but it's rather going to be shaped by thresholds, feedbacks, and deep uncertainty. The one thing that we do know from climate change science, and unfortunately this doesn't work, oh yeah, now it does, is that our future is going to be non-linear. This means that small differences in the changing can actually lead to very different outcomes. So on the left-hand side, you see one possible future, one that is actually marked by some but limited warming. We definitely see impacts, as we're already seeing today, but overall, we're going to be marked by relative stabilization. So we're going to stay in this green, safe space that is Holocene-like. There's another option that you can see on the right-hand side, a future that is actually marked by a shift in the Earth system state, by cascading changes, and a whole Earth system reorganization. Now the question is, what future are we actually heading into? And the answer is, this is of course determined by our behavior, by the pressures that we're putting on the Earth system, but not just that. It's also shaped by how the Earth system is going to reply to these pressures in detail. And that is something we cannot really control. And this brings us to the topic of tipping points in the climate system. What are tipping points? Tipping points are thresholds where a small change in part of the system can actually lead to cascading changes in the overall system's behavior. Now this might sound very complex, so I thought I want to start off with some more tangible examples. For example, a cat can tip over your favorite mug. As a cat owner, I can unfortunately confirm that that's possible. Or you might tip over when trying to balance on a chair. Now what all tipping elements that have tipping points have in common is that they have a stable before state and a critical threshold that, once crossed, leads to a very different stable after state. Now, still might sound a little bit strange if you're not accustomed to it, so I do want to give you some more examples, and I apologize, we do have some time lag here. People, I already talked about it, can tip over, and then can do that not just literally, but also figuratively. Or the mood in a room can tip when something unpleasant or unexpected happens. Negotiations can be on the brink or a tipping edge. And of course, when we turn to our ecosystems, a lake can tip when excess nutrients lead to harmful algae blooms and low oxygen levels. So we have lots of tipping points. But what actually is leading to this tipping point behavior? That's normally what we call self-reinforced feedback loops. In climate science, we sometimes say positive feedback loops, but that's not because they are positive in the sense of great, but because they're amplifying the initial change, leading to something that is nearly unstoppable. Again, let me go back to the examples. So we look at this happy, calm herd of cattle just chilling about, and then one of the cattle is actually going to be startled by the small yellow butterfly. It's getting scared and starting to run around, startling 2 other cattle. They too are then going to start to run around, startling the next ones, and so on until the full herd is running around like crazy. So we have a stable before state, the calm herd. We have a critical threshold once the first cow is starting to run around, and we have, from a scientific point of view, a stable after state with all of the cows running around like crazy. So again, tipping points are all about self-reinforcing feedback loops. If more A increases B and more B increases A, the 2 of them are going to increase each other until there's only infinited, basically, or some natural threshold or ceiling, basically, happening. And all this can happen just from a tiny nudge from the outside. In the Earth systems, there are more than 25 parts that have identified tipping behavior. And I want to talk through some of them with you right now, starting with the big ones, which are the ice sheets, the land ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica. To understand the tipping behavior here, you have to know that temperatures decrease with height. The higher up you go, the colder it gets, normally about 6 degrees per kilometers. Ice sheets are 3 kilometers or higher, meaning that their surfaces are on average about 20 degrees colder than the sea level, so really cold. If they start to melt, the elevation of the ice sheets is decreasing, getting into warmer air, continuing the melting, and so on and so on. So summing this up, under global warming, when this ice sheet melting starts off, due to the decrease in elevation, it can start a feedback loop that is very difficult to stop. And we already see melting. Now this is data from the GRACE satellite from Greenland. On the left-hand side, you can see the areas affecting by melting today, and on the right-hand side, the total ice loss in gigatons. We don't know yet whether Greenland has already crossed its tipping point, but if it were to happen, we do know that this means a quite different future, as Greenland holds enough ice, frozen water, to elevate sea levels by about 7 meters globally. Greenland's counterpart in the south, Antarctica, is also melting. The good news is the bigger part of Antarctica, East Antarctica, shown here on the right-hand side, seems to be fairly stable so far. You can see it's hardly affected by melting. The bad news is the western part of Antarctica, holding 3 meters of sea level equivalent, has already crossed its tipping point. So this is going to melt down, and we probably won't be able to do anything to stop it. It does take a few thousand years before it's going to be completely gone. This already shows you tipping points also act on different time scales. Some of them on quite long ones, some of them on shorter ones, which brings me to the next tipping point example, the rainforest, the tropicals, like the Congo Basin or the Amazon. These are governed by quite a lot of different feedback loops. I want to concentrate here on the main one, which is that forest trees are pretty good at taking up moisture, water, and evaporating it again. So basically, they're recycling the water, helping to increase rainfall further downstream or downward from the wind from the oceans away. But this also means that as forest covers decreases due to deforestation or wildfires, we have less moisture being recycled, decreasing rainfall downstream, and this could lead to further forest loss. And this is actually something that could happen within decades, that the Amazon would turn from a rainforest into a savanna. Now, if you were here this morning, Johan Rockström already talked about it. The Amazon is also a great example, and here you can actually see the forest loss that we are seeing since 1984. It might not look an awful lot if you look at it like this, but if you compare 1984 with 2018, you can see that especially in the southeast, we do see a great loss of forest. And as Jon already mentioned, the Amazon is a great example of showing you when we look at tipping risk, we cannot just look at climate change. If we look at the Amazon tipping risk from the global warming perspective, we would estimate it to be between 3 and 5 degrees of global warming. But if we also consider the other planetary boundaries, like land use change, this can already happen at only 1.5 to 2 degrees of warming when combined with 20 to 25% of forest loss. And this brings us, I would say, uncomfortably close to where we are today at 1.2 to 1.3 degrees of warming and already 17 to 20% of forest loss. Tipping could mean that the Amazon turns from a carbon sink to a carbon source. And this actually matters quite a bit because our current system can only work because nature, and that is the ocean and the land, are so far taking up about half of our carbon emissions, as you can see in this plot. So without these natural carbon sinks, global warming would be much higher. And this matters because, as you can see here, we are already at the risk range for quite a lot of tipping points, and these are only going to increase with further global warming. Now, to sum this up, or to end this actually, it's important that we realize that we're dealing with a very uncertain future. So basically you could say we are steering a system, our planet, over an ocean with some dangers, with possible dangers ahead. We don't really know where exactly these dangers are, and we have to hope that once we see them, we are still able to stop. But the problem is, we know the Earth system is actually one that has a lot of abrupt changes in it, different timescales, irreversibilities. So actually, I think our steering conditions are looking like this, quite foggy. And here it's also important that when you look at science, we can't wait for science to tell us what the future will look like with certainty. This is not about certainty, it's about risks and prevention. And with this, I'm over, or my time actually already. So the question is, do we have some questions on this or any other climate, physics, science-related topics? If so, it would be really great if you could raise your hand. We do have some helpers that would then hand you a microphone. If not, oh yeah, we actually have here in the front. Perfect.
What you have spoken are mostly symptoms of climate change. What are the causes of climate change? What are the causes of climate change?
Yeah, so the question is not what are just the symptoms, but what are the causes of climate change? And I think this is a simple but maybe somewhat hurtful answer, because we do know that climate change is really mainly part by us humans, by our behavior. It's the emissions, of course, of greenhouse gases, CO2, methanes. It's how we treat the land, that we are changing the freshwater cycles. And of course, and I said, this is what makes the future so difficult to predict, that then how the system evolves doesn't just depend on how we push it, but also on some inner dynamics and workings. But it is clear that we as humans are pushing it right now. And that's, of course, one could always spin it around and say this is good news because we can change our behavior, but it's also something that we really have to come to face with. Thank you for the question. Okay. Oh yeah, there's one more question. Here, this aisle basically down.
Hello, thank you. I wanted to know, as a scientist, how do you do to keep faith and to believe in our ability as a species to do the right things so that everything that you just evoked doesn't bring us to the abyss? Like, how do you get up in the morning, basically? That's my question.
Okay, so the question was how, as scientists, we keep faith. And I think that's a quite difficult one. It's definitely not a scientific question in the sense I can't use science to answer that. Maybe a little bit in the sense of we do see that parts of the Earth system can actually be quite resilient once you give them the chance to regrow. But from the more human perspective, I actually remain able to keep faith by coming to places like this and meeting people who are not looking away, who say, no, I want to change something. I'm not just continuing on this path that our, I don't want to say ancestors, but that we are set onto. I can change, I want to do something about it, and I'm willing to also do what is maybe uncomfortable, because I think that's also an important point. Maybe change doesn't come easy, but it's definitely possible, and I think it becomes the easier the more people are on board to do the change. So, and that actually brings us nicely to ChangeNOW. And maybe to close this up, I think for such an uncertain future, it's really also important that we become faithful but also resilient to what might happen. Resilience in political decisions, in communities, agriculture, culture. And with this, I want to actually hand over to the next part of the sessions who are going to talk about this. Thank you very much.